Blood is often just the perfect excuse for a legal robbery. When my father slid the psychiatric commitment papers across the dinner table, he thought he was teaching me a lesson in power. He believed fear was hereditary. However, he forgot a basic rule of the free market. Everything has a price, including his pride. I did not come here to beg for mercy. I came to collect a debt. Watch me buy his life for pennies on the dollar. My name is Lucille Tillingham, and I walked into the place that had haunted my nightmares for 20 years, not as a daughter returning home, but as an executioner in a silk blouse. The drive up to Newport had been treacherous. An unseasonal blizzard was battering the coast of Rhode Island, turning the Atlantic Ocean into a churning gray void and the roads into slick ribbons of black ice. My driver had suggested turning back twice, but I told him to keep moving. The weather was fitting. Stonecliff, the Tillingham family estate, never looked right in the sunlight. It was a structure designed for storms. It sat on the edge of the cliffs like a vulture perched on a carcass, its Gothic stone towers piercing the heavy fog that rolled in off the water. When the heavy oak front doors swung open, the air inside was not warm, it was stagnant. It smelled exactly as I remembered it from my childhood, a suffocating mixture of lemon floor wax, old dust trapped in velvet curtains, and the cloying, artificial sweetness of vanilla-scented candles trying desperately to mask the underlying odor of aged bourbon and decay. I shook the snow off my coat, handing it to a member of the staff I did not recognize. He looked young, terrified, and eager to be anywhere else. I could relate. "They are in the dining room. Ms. Tillingham," he whispered, eyes darting toward the double doors at the end of the hall. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady. I checked my reflection in the hallway mirror. At 29 years old, I did not look like the terrified girl who had been thrown out of this house 6 years ago. I looked like the CEO of Lumina Hospitality. I looked like a woman who managed a portfolio worth over $500 million. I adjusted the collar of my blazer, took a breath that did not tremble, and pushed the doors open. The scene before me was a tableau of family dysfunction so perfect it could have been a Renaissance painting titled The Betrayal. The dining room was cavernous, lit only by the flickering light of the fireplace and the candelabras on the long mahogany table. The wind howled outside, rattling the window panes in their lead frames, but inside, the silence was absolute. Preston Tillingham sat at the head of the table. My father, the chairman of the Tillingham Legacy Group. At 62, he was still a handsome man in a predatory sort of way, with silver hair swept back impeccably and a jawline that suggested unyielding stubbornness. He did not stand up when I entered. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. He simply lifted a manicured hand and pointed a finger at the empty chair directly opposite him, the seat of the accused. To his right sat my mother, Eleanor. She was staring into her empty soup bowl as if it contained the answers to the universe. Her hands were gripping a linen napkin so tightly that her knuckles were white, and even from across the room, I could see her eyes were rimmed with red. She looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by decades of shrinking herself to fit into Preston's shadow. She did not look up to meet my gaze. She couldn't. To his left was my younger sister, Beatrice. She was the only one who seemed unaffected, or at least, that was the performance she was committed to. She was slumped in her chair, scrolling through her phone with a bored expression, the blue light illuminating her face in the dim room. She didn't acknowledge my entrance, but I saw her thumb pause on the screen for a fraction of a second. She knew I was there. "Sit," Preston said. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. I walked to the chair, the sound of my heels clicking against the hardwood floor echoing like gunshots in the silence. I sat down, maintaining perfect posture. I did not touch the silverware. I did not unfold the napkin. "Hello, Father," I said. "Mother, Beatrice." Eleanor let out a small, choked sob, but quickly covered it with a cough. Beatrice kept scrolling. Preston ignored the pleasantries. He picked up a thick manila envelope that had been sitting next to his wine glass and slid it across the polished wood. It stopped precisely at the edge of the table in front of me. "We are skipping the small talk, Lucille," Preston said, his voice smooth and devoid of affection. "I have a board meeting in the morning, and I want this settled before then." I looked down at the envelope, but did not open it. "And what is this?" "Your salvation," he said, taking a sip of his wine. "Or your ruin. It depends entirely on how reasonable you decide to be tonight." I reached out and opened the envelope. Inside were two distinct documents. The first was a transfer of ownership agreement. It was a legal document demanding the full and immediate transfer of my CEO position and all controlling shares of Lumina Hospitality to the Tillingham Legacy Group. It was a demand for me to hand over everything I had built, my $580 million hotel chain, for the price of $1. I felt a cold laugh bubbling up in my throat, but I suppressed it. I flipped to the second document. It was a medical file, specifically, a psychiatric evaluation. The letterhead belonged to Dr. Aris, the family physician who had been on Preston's payroll since I was in diapers. I scanned the text. The medical jargon was dense, but the conclusion was highlighted in bold. Patient, Lucille Tillingham. Diagnosis, acute paranoid disorder with episodes of dissociation and self-harm. Recommendation, immediate involuntary commitment to a secure facility for indefinite observation. The date on the evaluation was from yesterday. I had not seen Dr. Aris in 10 years. I looked up slowly. The room felt suddenly hotter. The air thick and oppressive. The smell of the vanilla candles became nauseating. "What is this joke?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Preston leaned forward, his elbows resting on the table. The firelight cast long, dancing shadows across his face, making him look grotesque. "It is no joke, Lucille," he said softly. "You have been working too hard. Everyone sees it. You are erratic. You are making poor decisions. You are imagining enemies where there are none. Doctor Aris agrees with me. He has signed the affidavit. If you do not sign the transfer agreement tonight, that medical file goes public tomorrow morning." I looked at the papers again. "You are threatening to institutionalize me?" "I am offering you a choice," Preston corrected, his tone reasonable, as if he were discussing a dinner menu rather than my life. "Option A. You sign over Lumina. You admit that the stress is too much for you. You step down gracefully, citing health reasons. The family takes care of you. We keep your dignity intact. You go to a nice spa in Switzerland for a year. You disappear." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Option B," he continued, his voice hardening into steel. "You refuse, and tomorrow morning, at 9 o'clock, an ambulance will arrive at your headquarters in Boston. 2 orderlies will walk into your glass-walled office and strap you to a gurney in front of your entire staff. The press will be tipped off. By noon, the world will know that the brilliant Lucille Tillingham has suffered a psychotic break. Your stock will plummet. Your board will remove you, and you will wake up in a padded room at Willow Creek." Willow Creek. The name sent a chill down my spine. It was a private facility in the Berkshires that specialized in making inconvenient wealthy people disappear. "You would lock your own daughter away," I said. It was not a question. "I would do what is necessary to protect the family legacy," Preston replied. "Lumina belongs under the Tillingham umbrella. You built it, yes, but you built it with my name, and you are ruining it with your independence." I looked at my mother. "Mom, are you hearing this?" Eleanor flinched. She looked at Preston, terror etched into every line of her face. Then she looked at me, her eyes pleading. "Please, Lucille," she whispered, her voice trembling so much it was barely audible. "Just sign it, please. He just wants what is best. Don't make a scene. Just come home." My heart broke a little, not for myself, but for her. She was a shell of a human being, hollowed out by 40 years of living with a monster. I turned my gaze back to Preston. He was watching me with a smug satisfaction. He thought he had won. He thought I was the same little girl who used to hide in the library when he raised his voice. He thought the threat of public humiliation would break me because he believed that image was everything. For a second, a phantom memory washed over me. The feeling of being 12 years old, standing in this exact room, shaking as he screamed at me for spilling a glass of water. The paralyzing fear that I was small, and he was a giant, and his word was law. But that was a lifetime ago. That was before Elias. That was before I built a hospitality empire from a basement in Dorchester. That was before I learned that giants are just men standing on stilts. I looked at him. I really looked at him. Despite the fact that the heating in the house was blasting to combat the storm outside, I noticed something. There were beads of sweat glistening on Preston's forehead, right along his hairline. Why was he sweating? He held all the cards. He had the leverage. He had the fake doctor, the power of attorney, the terrifying reputation. He should be cool as ice, but he wasn't. I watched him reach for the wine decanter to refill his glass. It was a subtle movement. He tried to do it casually, maintaining eye contact with me to assert dominance, but as he lifted the heavy crystal decanter, his hand betrayed him. It was a micro-tremor, a tiny, almost imperceptible shake. The spout of the decanter wavered just an inch to the left. Splash. A dark crimson stain bloomed on the pristine white tablecloth. It was a small mistake, nothing mistake, but for a man like Preston Tillingham, who prided himself on absolute mechanical perfection, it was a scream. He stared at the stain for a second, his eyes widening in a flash of genuine panic, before he quickly set the decanter down with a clatter that was too loud for the room. "Look what you made me do," he snapped, grabbing a napkin to dab at the wine. But the aggression in his voice sounded thin. Brittle. That was it. That was the sign. He wasn't taking my company because he wanted to expand. He wasn't doing this because he was greedy. Well, not just because he was greedy, he was desperate. A man who holds a winning hand does not sweat in a temperate room. A man who has supreme leverage does not have a tremor in his hand. He needed Lumina. He didn't just want it. He needed it. And he needed it now. Immediate transfer. Immediate control. Why? The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place in my mind. Aligning with the encrypted messages I had received 48 hours ago, the rumors of debt, the risky investments in the Caribbean. He wasn't the executioner. He was the one with the noose around his neck, and he was trying to use my company as the stool to stand on. The fear in my chest evaporated, replaced instantly by a cold, sharp clarity. It was a sensation like inhaling frosty air. It woke up every nerve ending in my body. The pity I felt for my mother remained. But the fear of my father turned into ash. I sat back in my chair. I did not touch the pen he had placed next to the papers. I crossed my legs and smoothed the fabric of my trousers. "You seem tense, Father," I said. My voice is different now. The daughter was gone. The CEO was in the room. Preston stopped dabbing at the wine stain. He looked up, his eyes narrowing. He sensed the shift, but he couldn't identify it. "Sign the papers. Lucille, I am losing my patience." "I don't think I will," I said softly. "Then you will be in a straitjacket by noon tomorrow," he hissed. "Do not test me. I destroyed your little landscaping husband's career with a single phone call 6 years ago. Do you think I won't destroy you?" "I know you would try," I said. "But you are forgetting something. And what is that?" I leaned forward, mirroring his posture, invading his space from across the table. I locked eyes with him, letting him see the absolute lack of fear in my gaze. I wanted him to see the reflection of his own desperation. "You think you are holding a gun," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "But actually, you are holding the blade of a knife." The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow, triggered by the sight of that wine stain spreading across the white tablecloth. It was the color of the cheap lipstick I had worn 6 years ago. The day the heavy iron gates of Stonecliff had slammed shut behind me for what I thought was the last time. My father had not just exiled me, he had tried to erase me. I remembered standing on the other side of those gates, clutching a garbage bag that contained my entire wardrobe, while the winter wind whipped my hair across my face. I was 23 years old. I had a degree from Wharton, a head full of ideas, and a heart that had committed the unforgivable sin of falling in love with the wrong man. Elias Thorne was a landscape architect. In my father's vocabulary, that was a polite term for a gardener. Preston Tillingham did not believe that men who worked with dirt were fit to touch his daughter. When I refused to break off the engagement, Preston did not just cut me off, he declared war. I remembered the humiliating sound of the decline beep at the gas station 3 hours after I left the house. My credit cards were not just canceled, they were reported stolen. My bank accounts were frozen. I had $17 in cash and a half tank of gas in a car that technically belonged to the company, which was repossessed the next morning while we slept. For the first 6 months, we lived in Dorchester. Not the gentrified part with the cute coffee shops, but the part where the streetlights were broken and the police sirens were the lullaby that sang us to sleep. We rented a basement apartment that the landlord generously called a garden suite. It smelled of damp earth and boiling cabbage from the neighbors upstairs. The ceiling was so low that Elias had to stoop whenever he walked from the kitchenette to the mattress on the floor. It was the happiest and most terrifying time of my life. Preston made sure of the terror. He used his influence to blacklist Elias, every major architecture firm in Boston, every boutique design studio in Providence, even the mid-sized landscaping companies in the suburbs. They all suddenly had no openings. My father had made calls. He had threatened contracts. He had made it clear that hiring Elias Thorne was an act of aggression against the Tillingham Empire. We survived on instant noodles and the discounted bread from the bakery where I worked the closing shift. I remembered one particularly brutal week in February. The heating in our apartment broke, and the landlord was in Florida and refused to answer his phone. The temperature inside dropped until we could see our breath. We had one good winter coat between us, a heavy wool parka Elias had bought at a thrift store. We took turns wearing it. When I had to walk to the subway to get to my shift, I wore the coat. When Elias went out to walk the neighborhood looking for day labor gigs on construction sites, he wore the coat. At night, we threw it over our thin duvet and huddled together for warmth. I remembered waking up one morning, my teeth chattering, to find Elias wrapping his arms around me, his body acting as a human shield against the cold seeping up from the concrete floor. He never complained, not once. He never said that this was my fault. He never suggested that maybe I should call my father and apologize. Instead, he used the backs of flyers, the inside of cereal boxes, and napkins from the diner where we shared a single cup of coffee on Sundays. He drew skylines and structures that defied gravity. He sketched hotels that didn't look like fortresses, but like extensions of the earth. He designed lobbies that were flooded with natural light and rooms that breathed. One night, watching him sketch a vertical garden facade on the back of an eviction notice, I realized that we were starving, but we were not poor. We had something my father did not have. We had vision, but vision required capital. The decision was the hardest I had ever made, not because of the money, but because of the sentiment. I had one thing of value left, a vintage diamond ring that had belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor's mother. She had slipped it into my pocket the day she died, bypassing my mother and my father entirely. It was a beautiful, heavy platinum band with a 3-carat solitaire that caught the light even in that dingy basement. I told Elias I was going for a walk. I went to a jeweler in the Diamond District, a man known for discretion and cash transactions. I placed the ring on the counter. My hand shook. That ring was my only link to a past that wasn't painful. It was my safety net. Selling it felt like severing the last limb of my identity. The jeweler gave me $45,000. It was a fraction of its insured value. But to us, it was a fortune. It was freedom. I came home and poured the cash onto the mattress. Elias looked at the money, then at my bare finger, and his eyes filled with tears. He didn't say anything. He just kissed my hand, right where the ring used to be, and promised me that one day he would buy me a ring 10 times as big. I don't want a ring, I told him. I want to build. We used that money to put a down payment on a derelict warehouse in the Seaport District. It was a rotting shell of a building, filled with rusted machinery and pigeon droppings. People thought we were insane. They saw a ruin. Elias saw a sanctuary. We built the first Lumina hotel with our own hands. We couldn't afford a full construction crew, so we hired day laborers and worked alongside them. I learned how to sand floorboards until my hands were covered in blisters. I learned how to mix grout and hang drywall. I spent 18 hours a day in steel-toed boots, covered in dust and paint. Elias was the architect, the foreman, and the laborer all at once. He designed a system to recycle rainwater for the hotel's plumbing and created a thermal heating system that cut energy costs by 60%. It was sustainable luxury before the term became a marketing buzzword. I remembered the day my father came to visit. It was 3 months before our grand opening. The lobby was still a construction zone, filled with sawdust and scaffolding. I was on a ladder, painting the crown molding, wearing a pair of oversized overalls that were stained with primer. I heard the distinct sound of expensive leather shoes on the concrete floor. The rhythm was unmistakable. I looked down and saw Preston standing there. He was wearing a bespoke navy suit, a cashmere overcoat, and a look of utter disdain. He looked like he had stepped onto a different planet. He didn't look at the soaring arches Elias had restored. He didn't notice the innovative use of reclaimed wood. He just saw the dust. "So," he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. "This is it? This is what you gave up your inheritance for?" I climbed down the ladder, wiping my hands on a rag. I didn't offer to shake his hand. "Hello, Father." He looked around, kicking a piece of loose drywall with the toe of his shoe. "You are going to fail, Lucille. You know that, don't you? You have no distribution network. You have no brand recognition. You are playing house in a garbage dump." "It is not a dump," I said, my voice steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "It is the future." He laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "It is a money pit. When the bank comes to foreclose, do not come crawling back to Stonecliff. I will not bail you out. I want you to learn what the bottom looks like." "I am already at the bottom," I told him, looking him straight in the eye. "And the view is actually quite clear from here. I can see things I never saw from your dining room table." "Such as?" he sneered. "That I don't need you." He left without another word. He walked out of that warehouse certain that he would read about my bankruptcy within the year. He was wrong. The first Lumina Hotel opened to critical acclaim. Travelers were tired of the stuffy, gilded cages that the Tillingham Legacy Group offered. They wanted authenticity. They wanted Elias's biophilic designs that brought nature indoors. They wanted my service philosophy, which treated guests like humans. Not walking wallets, we made a profit in the first quarter. By the second year, we opened 2 more locations. By the 5th year, Lumina Hospitality was valued at over $500 million. We disrupted the market. We stole his market share. We did it without his money, without his connections, and without his name. My motivation was never the money. The money was just a way of keeping score. My motivation was the look on his face when he read the Forbes article that named me Innovator of the Year. My motivation was proving that I existed, that I was a person, separate and whole, not just an extension of his ego. I came back to the present, blinking away the memory of the cold basement and the smell of sawdust. I looked across the table at Preston. 6 years had passed. I had gone from sharing a winter coat to wearing a suit that cost more than that entire basement apartment. I had gone from selling my grandmother's ring to commanding an empire, and he hadn't changed at all. I studied his face in the flickering candlelight. He had more wrinkles around his eyes. Yes, his hair was thinner, but the rot inside was exactly the same. He was still the man who believed he owned people. He was still the bully who thought fear was the only currency that mattered. But as I looked at him, I realized something else, something profound. He was smaller. The giant who had cast a shadow over my entire life had shrunk. He was just an angry, desperate old man sitting in a drafty house, trying to steal what he could not create. The fear I had felt earlier, the residual trauma of my childhood, finally dissolved completely. It was replaced by a strange, cold pity. He had tried to bury us. He didn't know we were seeds. "You look tired." "Father," I said, breaking the silence that had settled after my comment about the knife. "Is the burden of the crown becoming too heavy?" He scowled, confused by my lack of submission. "I am perfectly fine. The question is, are you ready to sign, or do I need to make the call to the hospital?" I reached for the wine glass in front of me, the one I hadn't touched since I arrived. I took a slow, deliberate sip. The wine was excellent, a vintage Tillingham Reserve. It tasted like blood and money. "I am not signing anything," I said, placing the glass down. "But I am glad you brought up the past. It reminded me of something important. It reminded me that I have already survived the worst you can do. You took my home. You took my money. You took my name. And I built a kingdom out of the rubble. So tell me, Preston, what exactly do you think you can take from me now that I haven't already replaced with something better?" I watched his jaw tighten. He didn't know it yet, but the dinner was over. The negotiation had ended 6 years ago in a basement in Dorchester. Tonight was just the paperwork. To understand the precise mechanics of how a kingdom crumbles, one must rewind the clock exactly 48 hours before I walked into that dining room. 2 days ago. I was standing in my corner office on the 42nd floor of the Prudential Tower in Boston, looking down at the city that I had conquered. The sun was setting, casting a gold and violet hue over the Charles River. But the glow I felt had nothing to do with the view. My CFO had just left the room after delivering the final valuation report for Lumina Hospitality. We had closed at an all-time high on the market. The analysts had crunched the numbers, evaluated our assets, projected our growth, and stamped a figure on my life's work. $580 million. I was 29 years old, and I had built a $500 million enterprise from a basement. I should have been celebrating. I should have been calling Elias to tell him to book a table at our favorite Italian restaurant. But then my private phone buzzed. It was not a text message. It was a notification from an encrypted messaging app that I use strictly for high-level corporate espionage and whistleblower complaints. The sender ID was a string of random alphanumeric characters, but the subject line consisted of a single word, Ozymandias. I knew immediately who it was. There was only one person in my father's orbit who read Percy Shelley poetry and understood the irony of fallen kings. It was Sarah, his executive assistant of 15 years, whom he had unceremoniously fired 3 weeks ago for gross incompetence after she dared to correct a typo in his memo. I unlocked the phone. There was no message body, only a PDF attachment named project_Bahamas_redacted.pdf. I sat down at my desk, the leather creaking softly, and opened the file. What I saw made the blood in my veins turn to ice water. It was not a corporate brochure. It was a forensic disaster. The document detailed the internal financials of the Tillingham Legacy Group for the last 4 quarters. On the surface, publicly, my father's company appeared stable, but the internal ledgers told a story of hemorrhage. The company was bleeding cash at a rate of $4 million a month, and the cause was something called the Azure Horizon Resort. According to the glossies, Azure Horizon was supposed to be the crown jewel of the Tillingham portfolio, a massive ultra-luxury eco-resort on a private island in the Bahamas. My father had been funneling tens of millions of dollars into its development for 2 years. He had leveraged existing properties. He had drained the pension fund. I minimized the PDF and pulled up a satellite imaging program on my secure terminal. I typed in the coordinates listed in the project file. The screen zoomed in, swooping down from space to the turquoise waters of the Caribbean. I waited for the image to resolve, expecting to see foundations, cranes, perhaps the skeleton of a main hotel building. There was nothing. The coordinates pointed to a stretch of barren white sand and scrub brush. There were no construction vehicles. There were no materials. There was not even a road. My father had spent over $60 million on a patch of dirt. I leaned back, my mind racing. Where did the money go? Construction contracts to shell companies, consulting fees to offshore accounts. It was a classic embezzlement scheme, or perhaps just colossal mismanagement covered up by fraud. But the why didn't matter as much as the how. How was he keeping the lights on? I went back to the documents Sarah had sent. I scrolled to the liabilities section. The Tillingham Legacy Group was insolvent. To cover the losses from the Phantom Bahamas project and keep the stock price artificially inflated, Preston had stopped borrowing from traditional banks. The major banks, J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs, had likely smelled the rot months ago and cut off his credit lines. So, he had gone elsewhere. I found the entry at the bottom of page 42, a short-term bridge loan for $35 million. The lender was an entity listed as Viper Capital, LLC. The name sounded like a bad joke from a B movie, but in the dark corners of high finance, Viper Capital was very real. They were a predatory lending fund, a shadow bank that specialized in distressed assets. They lent money to dying companies when no one else would, but the cost was your soul. I scanned the terms of the loan. They were draconian. The interest rate was not annual. It was monthly. The penalties for late payment were catastrophic. But the most terrifying clause was the maturity date. The loan was a balloon payment structure. The entire principal of $35 million, plus accrued interest and fees, was due in full on Friday. February 4th, that was today. I looked at the clock on my wall. It was Wednesday evening. The loan was due in 48 hours. Suddenly, the dinner invitation I had received earlier that morning made perfect, terrible sense. My father had not invited me to Newport to reconcile. He had not invited me because he missed his daughter. He had invited me because the clock was ticking down to 0. The realization hit me with the clarity of a lightning strike. Preston Tillingham did not just want my company because of his ego. He needed Lumina hospitality because we were liquid. We had cash. We had clean assets. If he could force me to sign over control, he could use my balance sheet to secure a refinance or simply drain my accounts to pay off Viper Capital before the deadline. He was going to cannibalize my life's work to cover up his own fraud. And the psychiatric papers? The threat of the asylum? That was his insurance policy. If I refused to sign, he would have me declared incompetent, take power of attorney, and sign the transfer himself. He was willing to lock his own daughter in a padded room, medicate her into oblivion, and destroy her reputation, all to save himself from bankruptcy and potential prison time for investor fraud. I stood up and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights of Boston were twinkling below me, but all I could see was the reflection of my own fury. It was a cold, hard rage. It was not the anger of a hurt child. It was the calculated wrath of a CEO who has just discovered a hostile takeover attempt. He thought I was the prey. He thought he could corner me in his dining room and flash a fake doctor's note and I would crumble. He had forgotten who I was. I was the woman who built a skyscraper out of a basement. I turned back to my desk and pressed the speed dial for number 1. Marcus, I said the moment the line connected. Marcus Vanderhoven was my chief legal counsel. He was a shark in a 3-piece suit, a man who billed $1,200 an hour and was worth every penny. Lucille? His voice was groggy. It was late. Is everything all right? No, I said, my voice crisp. I need you to wake up. I need you to open your secure laptop. And I need you to drop every other case you are working on. What is happening? My father is about to try a hostile acquisition of Lumina using blackmail. But that is not the important part. The important part is that he is underwater with a shark, and the blood is in the water. I forwarded the file to him. I just sent you a document. Tillingham Legacy Group owes $35 million to a fund called Viper Capital. The note matures this Friday at midnight. I heard the rapid clicking of keys on the other end of the line. Viper Capital? Lucille, these guys are legitimate loan sharks. They don't sue you. They break your legs financially. They strip assets before the ink is dry on the bankruptcy filing. I know, I said. I want you to find them. Find them? Why? Do you want to report them? No, I said. I want to buy the debt. There was a long silence on the line. I could practically hear Marcus's brain shifting gears from defense to offense. Lucille, he said slowly, if you buy that debt, You become your father's creditor. You hold the note. Exactly. But why would Viper sell? If the note is due in 48 hours, they are expecting a payout. Look at the collateral. Marcus, I instructed. Look at what he put up against the loan. More typing. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Good God, he pledged the voting stock. He pledged 51% of Tillingham Legacy Group as collateral against a $35 million loan? That is insane. The company is worth 10 times that on paper. On paper, I corrected. But in reality, it is hollow, and Viper knows it. They know about the Bahamas. They know he can't pay. They are looking at a messy foreclosure, years of litigation, and fighting with other creditors. They want cash. They want a clean exit. You want me to offer to buy a toxic loan for face value? I want you to buy it tonight, I said. Offer them the full principal, $35 million, cash wire. Immediate settlement. Tell them we will take the risk of collection off their hands. They will take the money and run. This is aggressive. Lucille, even for you. He is planning to commit me to a mental institution. Marcus, he has a fake diagnosis ready. He is going to try to declare me unfit to lead Lumina. He is what? Marcus's voice dropped an octave. The lawyer was gone. The friend was there. Lucille, we can get a restraining order. We can go to the police. No police, I said. Police are for victims. I am not a victim. I am a capitalist. I looked out at the city again. I don't want to arrest him. I want to own him. I want to hold the piece of paper that says his life belongs to me. Okay, Marcus said, his voice stealing. I will make the call. Viper operates out of a shell office in the Cayman Islands, but their legal representative is in New York. I will find him. I will get the papers drawn up. Do it, I said. And Marcus? Set up a shell company to make the purchase. I don't want the name Tillingham anywhere near the transaction until I'm ready to reveal it. Call it Nemesis Holdings. Nemesis, Marcus repeated. Fitting. I will call you within the hour. I hung up the phone. The investigation had taken less than 60 minutes. The mystery of my father's aggression was solved. It was not a display of power. It was the thrashing of a drowning man. He had dug a hole so deep that he could see the center of the earth, and he had decided that the only way to climb out was to stand on my corpse. The audacity of it was breathtaking. He really believed that because he gave me life. He had the right to consume it. He believed that my success was simply a resource for him to harvest when his own crops failed. I sat back down at my desk and pulled up my personal banking interface. I had the liquidity. It would take a significant chunk of my personal cash reserves. Money I had planned to invest in the new European expansion, but it was worth it. This was not just a business transaction. This was an exorcism. I spent the next hour digging deeper into the Viper Capital contract. The more I read, the more I realized just how precarious Preston's position was. The contract had a strict change of control clause. It had an accelerated repayment clause if the borrower's credit rating dipped. It was a trap designed to snap shut, and Preston had walked right into it because his arrogance wouldn't let him admit he had failed. He could have come to me, 6 months ago. If he had come to me, hat in hand, and admitted he messed up in the Bahamas, I might have helped him. I might have quietly bailed him out to save the family name. I might have structured a loan. But he didn't do that. He chose violence. He chose to attack my sanity. He chose to weaponize the one thing, my mental health, that was untouchable. So now, I would choose violence too. But mine would be legal, binding, and notarized. Marcus called back 45 minutes later. I have them, he said. The representative for Viper is stunned. He thought Tillingham was going to default. When I mentioned a full cash buyout of the debt, he almost choked. He is drafting the assignment agreement now. We can sign first thing in the morning. Good, I said. I will be there. One thing. Lucille, Marcus warned. Once you buy this debt, if he doesn't pay by midnight on Friday, you have to be ready to pull the trigger. You have to be ready to foreclose on your own father. Can you do that? I thought about the cold dining room at Stonecliff. I thought about the way he used to look at me when I was a child, as if I were a disappointment he couldn't quite return to the store. I thought about Elias shivering in a basement because my father had blacklisted him. "Have the papers ready, Marcus," I said. "I won't just pull the trigger, I will enjoy the recoil." That was 48 hours ago. Now, sitting in the dining room, watching Preston pretend to be the king of the castle. I felt a weight in my handbag. It was a heavy leather portfolio. Inside was the assignment of debt, signed and sealed by Nemesis Holdings. He thought the deadline was midnight. He thought he was squeezing me. He had no idea that the clock had already stopped, and the gun was already in my hand. "You are awfully quiet, Lucille," Preston said, breaking my train of thought. He was cutting into his steak with aggressive strokes. "Are you considering my offer? Or are you just calculating how long you will survive in a padded cell?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had given him in years. "I was just thinking about the market, Father," I said. "It is fascinating how quickly fortunes can change. One minute you are the investor, and the next, you are just collateral." He frowned, not understanding. He couldn't hear the ticking, but I could, and it was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. 6 hours before I sat down at my father's dining table to be threatened with a straitjacket. I was sitting in a leather chair that cost more than my first car. Surrounded by the smell of mahogany and fear, the location was the conference room of Vanderhoven Associates. Perched high above the financial district of Boston, the storm was just beginning to gather strength outside, turning the sky a bruised purple. But inside, the climate was controlled, sterile, and expensive. I was there to buy a man's life. Across from me sat Marcus, my attorney. He looked calm, but I could see the tension in the way he aligned his pen with the edge of his legal pad. Next to him sat a man I had never met, but whose reputation preceded him like a bad smell. Mr. Silas Vance, the senior risk officer for Viper Capital. Vance was a man who looked like he had been eroded by years of calculating other people's misery. He was thin, wearing a suit that was slightly too large for him, and his eyes darted around the room as if he expected an ambush. When he looked at me, there was a mixture of confusion and suspicion in his gaze. "Ms. Tillingham," Vance said, his voice scratching like dry leaves. "I must admit, this is highly irregular. We usually deal with corporate distressed asset managers. We do not typically sell debt to the family members of the debtor. I am not here as a family member." "Mr. Vance," I replied, my voice devoid of any warmth. "I am here as the sole proprietor of Nemesis Holdings, and I am here to solve a problem for you." Vance tapped a finger on the thick stack of documents in front of him. "A problem? Your father is our client." "My father is a liability," I corrected him. "And you know it. The loan matures in less than 10 hours. You know he doesn't have the liquidity to pay you. You are looking at a default at midnight. You are looking at messy litigation, asset seizure, and a long line of other creditors fighting for scraps. You are looking at a total loss on your books for this quarter." Vance stayed silent. He knew I was right. Viper Capital thrived on fear. But they hated risk. They wanted quick returns, not court battles. "I am offering you a clean exit," I continued, leaning forward. "Full principal, $35 million, plus the accrued interest and the early termination fees. I will wire the funds to your Cayman account before you leave this room. In exchange, you assign the debt, and all associated collateral rights, to Nemesis Holdings." Vance looked at Marcus, then back at me. He was doing the math in his head. He was realizing that he was about to get 100 cents on the dollar for a loan that was effectively garbage. "The paperwork is ready," Vance said slowly, "but I need to be clear about the collateral terms. Do you understand what your father pledged against this loan?" "I have read the abstract," I said, "but I want to see the original signature page." Vance opened his briefcase. It was crocodile skin, flashy and tacky. He slid a heavy document across the polished table. I flipped to the section marked Schedule A. pledged assets. I had expected to see real estate. I had expected to see the deed to the Stonecliff mansion, or perhaps the title to the family's private jet, or even the land rights to some of the older hotels. But what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. There, in black and white, was the itemization of the collateral. 51% of the Class A voting shares of Tillingham Legacy Group. I stared at the paper. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Preston Tillingham had not just bet the house, he had bet the kingdom. He had pledged the controlling interest of his own company. If he defaulted on this loan, the lender had the immediate right to seize the majority of the stock. They would not just be a creditor, they would become the owner. They could fire him. They could liquidate the assets. They could burn the legacy to the ground. It was an act of breathtaking stupidity. It was the move of a gambler who was so addicted to the rush, or so deluded by his own invincibility, that he put his crown on the table for a spin of the roulette wheel. He had been so certain that the Bahamas project would turn a profit that he had risked everything he had spent 40 years building. He really did it, I whispered, more to myself than to the room. He actually mortgaged the throne. It is a standard clause for high-risk bridge loans, Vance said indifferently. We require absolute security. If he doesn't pay by midnight tonight, the shares revert to the holder of the note. Automatic transfer. No court order required. And that holder, Marcus interjected smoothly, sliding a checkbook toward me, will be Nemesis Holdings. I looked at the signature at the bottom of the page. Preston J. Tillingham. The signature was bold, sweeping, arrogant. It was the signature of a man who thought he would never have to pay the piper. I picked up my pen. It was a Mont Blanc, heavy and black, a gift from Elias when we opened our third hotel. If I sign this, I asked Vance, and I wire you the money, the transfer is immediate? I become the legal holder of this note effective today? The moment the funds clear, Vance confirmed. We wash our hands of it. He is your problem then. I didn't hesitate. I didn't think about the birthday parties he had missed. I didn't think about the harsh words. I didn't think about the coldness. I thought about the business. This was a hostile takeover, and I was the hostility. I wrote the check. $35,420,000. It was a staggering amount of money. It was enough to buy a private island. It was enough to fund a charity for a decade, and I was spending it to buy a piece of paper that said I owned my father. I tore the check from the book and handed it to Marcus, who verified the amount and handed it to Vance. Vance looked at the check. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery but was trying to look bored. A pleasure doing business with you, Ms. Tillingham, Vance said, standing up and snapping his briefcase shut. I will have my office send the electronic confirmation of the assignment within the hour. Good luck collecting. He is a difficult man. I know, I said. I raised myself. Vance left the room. The door clicked shut, leaving a heavy silence in his wake. Marcus let out a long breath he seemed to have been holding for 20 minutes. He slumped back in his chair and loosened his tie. You realize what you just did, Lucille? He asked quietly. I just bought a controlling interest in the Tillingham Legacy Group for $35 million, I said, staring at the document in front of me. It is a steal. The real estate assets alone are worth 10 times that. You didn't buy the company, Marcus corrected. You bought the option to take the company. He still has until midnight to pay you. If he comes up with the money, you have to take it. You have to walk away. I stood up and walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, white streaks against the gray glass. He doesn't have the money, Marcus, I said. He is tapping me for it tonight. He is going to try to force me to sign over Lumina so he can drain my accounts to pay Viper. He doesn't know that Viper is already out of the building. He doesn't know he is borrowing from Peter to pay well. Peter's daughter. My phone buzzed on the conference table. It was Elias. I picked it up. Hey, you are late. Elias's voice was warm, a stark contrast to the sterile atmosphere of the law firm. I made that risotto you like, but looking at the Weather Channel, I am guessing you are not coming home for dinner. I can't, I said, feeling a pang of guilt. I have to go to Newport. I have to go to dinner at Stonecliff. There was a pause on the line. Elias knew what that house meant to me. He knew the scars it had left. Do you want me to come with you? He asked immediately. I can be ready in 10 minutes. I will drive. No, I said firmly. This is something I have to do alone. He needs to see me standing on my own 2 feet. If you are there, he will just focus on insulting you. I need him to focus on me. Is it safe? Elias asked. You know how he gets when he is cornered? I am safe, I assured him. Marcus is handling the legal side, and I am bringing insurance. Insurance? I just bought his debt. Elias, I said, the words tasting strange on my tongue. I own him. He just doesn't know it yet. Silence on the other end. Then, a low whistle. You actually did it. I did. Okay, Elias said. Just be careful. Don't let him get in your head. You are not the person he thinks you are. I know, I said. Go ahead and eat without me. But save the wine. Open the good bottle. The one we were saving for the anniversary. Why? Because, I said, looking at the signed contract on the table, I am going to bring home a gift. A very big gift. I love you, Lucille. Go get him. I love you too. I hung up. I looked at Marcus. He had already placed the assignment of debt, the original loan agreement, and the transfer of collateral documents into a sleek black leather briefcase. It is all there, Marcus said, handing it to me. The minute the clock strikes 12, if the funds are not in the Nemesis Holdings account, which we both know is empty, you have the legal right to execute the transfer. You walk out of there the majority shareholder. Thank you, Marcus, I said, for everything. I took the briefcase. It was heavy. It felt dense, like it contained a collapsed star. I walked out of the office and into the elevator. The doors slid shut, enclosing me in a box of mirrors and polished steel. I looked at my reflection. For years, whenever I looked in the mirror, I searched for traces of him. I checked my eyes to see if they were cold like his. I checked my mouth to see if it turned down at the corners like his. I had spent my 20s terrified that I would turn into Preston Tillingham. But today, I saw something different. I saw the silk blouse, crisp and white. I saw the tailored blazer, sharp enough to cut glass. I saw the eyes of a woman who had just negotiated a hostile takeover in under an hour without raising her voice. The girl who had cried in the back seat of a car while leaving Stonecliff 6 years ago was dead. She had frozen to death in that unheated apartment in Dorchester. The woman standing in the elevator was a shark. I had evolved. I had grown armor. And I had learned that in the ocean of high finance, you are either the one eating or you are the chum. I adjusted my collar. I tightened my grip on the briefcase handle. The elevator dinged, signaling the lobby. My driver was waiting. The car was idling at the curb, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the freezing air. To Newport, Ms. Tillingham? The driver asked, as he held the door open. Yes, I said, sliding into the back seat and placing the briefcase on the seat next to me like a passenger. To Newport, and don't spare the horses. I have a debt to collect. As the car pulled away, merging into the snarled traffic of a city bracing for a storm, I watched the snowflakes smash against the window. They looked fragile for a second. Then they melted and disappeared. I closed my eyes and prepared myself for the performance of a lifetime. I was going into the lion's den, but I wasn't bringing a whip or a chair. I was bringing the deed to the zoo. The silence in the dining room following my comment about the knife stretched thin and tight, like a violin string tuned to the point of snapping. Preston stared at me, his fork suspended halfway to his mouth. For a moment, I saw a flicker of genuine confusion behind his eyes. He was not used to resistance. He was used to obedience, or at the very least, fear. But the confusion was fleeting, quickly replaced by a renewed, suffocating layer of paternal condescension. He set his fork down with a deliberate clink against the china. He sighed, a long, weary sound designed to signal that he was the patient teacher dealing with a slow student. Lucille, he began, his voice dropping to a register of mock concern that made my skin crawl. This aggression is exactly what Dr. Aris was talking about. Do you not hear yourself? You are talking about knives and guns at a family dinner. You are paranoid. He reached out and gestured toward my face, though he did not touch me. Just look at you. You are gaunt. Your skin is gray. You have clearly not been sleeping. Is the pressure of running that company finally crushing you? It is, isn't it? You are drowning, and you are too proud to scream for a lifeguard. I almost laughed. I had just run a marathon in heels through the financial district, secured a multi-million-dollar deal, and destroyed a plate of risotto in my mind. Yet he was trying to convince me I was on death's door. I feel fantastic, actually, I said, picking up my wine glass again. I slept 8 hours last night. My last physical was perfect. My blood pressure is lower than yours. I would wager. Preston shook his head, a sad smile playing on his lips. Denial is the first symptom. You are manic, Lucille. You are building these hotels, expanding into Europe, taking on debt. It is all a frantic attempt to outrun your own instability. You need rest. You need structure. He leaned back, clasping his hands over his stomach. Willow Creek is wonderful this time of year. It is not a hospital. Darling, it is a sanctuary. They have equestrian therapy. They have meditation gardens. You would not be a prisoner. You would be a guest. 6 months? Just 6 months to clear your head while the adults handle the business. Is that really so terrible? I knew about Willow Creek. Everyone in our social circle knew about Willow Creek. It was where the scandalous wives, the drug-addicted sons, and the inconvenient daughters of New England's elite were stashed away until they could be trusted to smile for the cameras again. It was a prison with thread-count sheets and barred windows disguised by ivy. And who defines the adults in this scenario? I asked. You? The man who put his own company into a tailspin? Preston's eyes hardened. He ignored the jab about his company. He shifted his tactics. Looking for a softer target, he turned his head slowly to his right, fixing his gaze on my mother. Eleanor was shrinking in her chair. She had not eaten a bite of her food. Her hands were trembling in her lap, twisting the fabric of her napkin into a tight rope. Eleanor, Preston said, his voice sharp. Tell your daughter what we discussed this morning. You see it too, don't you? The erratic behavior, the mood swings. My mother flinched as if he had struck her. She kept her eyes glued to the table. Preston, please, let's just eat. Look at her. Preston slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. Look at your daughter. She is sick. Eleanor, do you want to visit her in a state penitentiary when she finally snaps and hurts someone? Or do you want her safe? Speak up. I watched my mother. I saw the terror in her eyes, a terror that had been cultivated for 40 years. Preston had spent decades eroding her confidence, isolating her from her friends, and making her doubt her own reality. She was not his partner. She was his first victim. Eleanor slowly lifted her head. Her eyes met mine, and they were swimming with tears. Lucille, she whispered, her voice shaking. Maybe your father is right. You work so hard. You always have. Maybe a break would be good. Just for a little while, so we can be a family again. Please, I just want everyone to be safe. It broke my heart. She wasn't agreeing with him because she believed him. She was agreeing with him because it was the only way to stop the shouting. She was trying to de-escalate the hostage situation by siding with the gunman. Mom, I said softly, I am not sick. You know I am not sick. She doesn't know anything, Preston snapped, cutting her off. She is a mother watching her child self-destruct. She is terrified for you. He turned back to me, his expression twisting into a sneer. And I know who is feeding this delusion of yours. It is that husband of yours, Elias. He said the name like it was a curse word. Do not bring Elias into this, I warned, my voice dropping an octave. How can I not? Preston laughed, a cruel barking sound. He is the poison in your ear, the landscaper, the dirt digger. He thinks he won the lottery when he married you. Do you think he actually loves you? Lucille, look in the mirror. You are difficult. You are sharp-edged. You are cold. A man like that, a simple, blue-collar nobody, he sticks around for the paycheck. He sticks around because he gets to play architect with your money. My hands curled into fists under the table. This was his favorite weapon. He knew that deep down, every child of great wealth harbors a secret fear that they are only loved for what they can provide, not for who they are. He was digging his thumb into that old wound, trying to make it bleed. Elias is twice the man you will ever be, I said. He builds things. You only know how to steal them. He will ruin you, Preston shouted. He has no idea how to manage a legacy like Lumina. If I let you keep control, that peasant will run it into the ground within a year. I am doing this to save you from him. When you are in Willow Creek, we will have the marriage annulled on the grounds of mental incompetence. We will cut him loose. You will thank me later. You have it all figured out, don't you? I asked, forcing myself to unclench my hands. The asylum, the annulment, the takeover, it is a perfect little coup. It is necessary, Preston said, regaining his composure. He took a sip of wine, looking satisfied. And it is happening, whether you sign or not. But if you don't sign tonight, Lucille, I promise you, tomorrow will be ugly. He leaned forward, his face illuminated by the candlelight, looking like a demon in a bespoke suit. Imagine the headlines, he whispered. Lumina CEO Baker acted after public meltdown. We will leak stories about you screaming at staff. We will have Dr. Aris release his findings on your violent tendencies. By the time the market opens at 9:30, your stock will be in freefall. The board will vote you out before you even get to the hospital. You will lose everything, your company, your reputation, your freedom. He paused to let the horror of the image sink in. Or, he said, tapping the papers with his index finger, you sign, you cite exhaustion, you step down as CEO, but remain on the board as a silent consultant. You keep your shares, well, a minority stake. You go to Willow Creek quietly, the stock holds steady, your legacy remains intact, and I take the burden off your shoulders. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He was offering to save me from the fire he was threatening to start. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had taught me how to ride a bicycle. The man who had walked me to my first day of school. I searched his face for any trace of conflict, any sign that he was hurting at the thought of destroying his own child. There was nothing. Just calculation. Just the cold, reptilian stare of a predator assessing a meal. A question formed in my mind. It was a question I had been asking myself since I was 6 years old, but I had never dared to voice it aloud. Why? I asked. Preston blinked. Why what? Why do you hate me so much? The question hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Even Beatrice stopped scrolling on her phone. Eleanor let out a small gasp. Preston stared at me. For a second, he looked offended. Then, a slow, chilling smile spread across his face. He chuckled, shaking his head as if I had said something incredibly naive. Hate you? He repeated. Lucille, don't be dramatic. I don't hate you. He picked up his knife and cut another piece of steak, the blade screeching slightly against the porcelain. You are my daughter, he said, popping the meat into his mouth and chewing slowly. I made you. I paid for your education. I gave you the best schools, the best clothes, the best life. You are an investment. He swallowed and pointed the knife at me. That is what you fail to understand. You are not a person to me. Lucille, you are an asset. You are a division of the Tillingham Legacy Group, and right now, you are a non-performing asset. You have resources, liquidity, credit, reputation that belong to the family. They belong to me, because without me, you would be nothing. He leaned back, his eyes dead and cold. I don't hate you, he said simply. I just need to liquidate you. You owe me this life. I gave it to you. And now I am calling in the debt. There it was, the truth. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about hate. It wasn't even about anger. It was about ownership. To Preston Tillingham, I was not a human being with a soul and a heartbeat. I was a ledger entry. I was a savings account he had been contributing to for 29 years. And now that he was bankrupt, he was ready to make a withdrawal. The final lock in my heart clicked shut. For years, a tiny, foolish part of me had held on to the hope that if I just became successful enough, if I just built a big enough empire, he would finally respect me. I had hoped that my success would make him love me, but now I knew. My success didn't make him love me. It just made me more delicious to eat. The hesitation I had felt earlier, the slight tremor of guilt about what I was about to do to my own father, evaporated instantly. It was replaced by a profound sense of clarity. I wasn't killing my father. I was closing a bad business deal. I looked at Eleanor, who was weeping silently. I looked at Beatrice, who was watching me with wide, fearful eyes, and then I looked at Preston. An asset, I repeated, tasting the word. That is an interesting way to put it. I reached down to the floor and picked up the heavy leather briefcase I had brought with me. I placed it on the table. The thud it made was heavy, solid, and final. It rattled the crystal wine glasses. Preston looked at the briefcase, then at me. What is that? Are those your resignation papers? Did you finally come to your senses? I unclicked the latches. The sound was like 2 pistol shots in the quiet room. No, Father, I said, my voice steady, devoid of any emotion whatsoever. You are right about one thing. Everything has a price. You think I owe you for my life? Fine, let's settle the account. I opened the lid. But you made a mistake in your valuation, I continued, reaching inside. You thought I was the asset, but in this room, at this table, right now I am the liquidator. Just as I was about to pull the documents from my briefcase, a voice cut through the tension like a razor blade. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't Preston's. Actually, Dad, there is a small problem with your plan. The entire room froze. We all turned to look at Beatrice, my younger sister, who had spent the entire dinner slumped in her chair, scrolling through TikTok and looking like she would rather be undergoing a root canal than sharing a meal with us. Was now sitting bolt upright. She had placed her phone flat on the table, screen facing down, and she was looking directly at Preston. Her expression was no longer bored, it was defiant. Preston blinked, clearly taken aback. Beatrice had never challenged him, in the Tillingham ecosystem. She was the decorative fern in the corner, silent, ornamental, and easily ignored. "Excuse me," Preston said, his voice dripping with annoyance. "Beatrice, do not interrupt when adults are speaking. Go back to your phone." "I can't," Beatrice said, her voice steady, though I saw her hands trembling slightly under the table. "Because the news I am reading is about your star witness, Dr. Aris." Preston stiffened. "What about Dr. Aris?" Beatrice reached out and flipped her phone over, sliding it across the tablecloth toward our father. The screen was bright in the dim room, displaying a breaking news alert from the Boston Globe. "He lost his license," Beatrice said clearly. "About 4 hours ago, the state medical board suspended him indefinitely, and the DEA just raided his office." I felt my jaw drop slightly. I looked at the screen. The headline was unmistakable. "Prominent Newport physician arrested in opioid prescription ring scandal." Preston stared at the phone. His face went from pale to a mottled shade of red. He snatched the device up and read the article, his eyes scanning frantically. "This is impossible," he stammered. "I spoke to him this morning. He was fine." He signed the affidavit. "Yeah, he signed a lot of things," Beatrice said dryly, "including thousands of fake prescriptions for OxyContin. Turns out, the feds have been watching him for months, but they only moved in today because someone sent them a tip about a fraudulent psychiatric evaluation he was planning to file tomorrow." The silence that followed was deafening. Preston slowly lowered the phone. He looked at Beatrice with a mixture of shock and dawning horror. "You," he whispered. "You did this?" Beatrice lifted her chin. It was the first time I had ever seen her look like a Tillingham, Not the broken version, but the strong one. I heard you on the phone with him last night. Dad, I heard you telling him what to write in Lucille's file. I heard you laughing about how easy it would be to lock her away. She paused, taking a breath. I recorded it, and I sent the recording to the state police this morning, anonymously, of course, but they moved pretty fast. I stared at my little sister. For years, I had thought she was lost. I thought she was just a spoiled, vapid girl who cared more about her Instagram following than her family. I had judged her for staying in this house, for taking Preston's money, for playing the part of the dutiful daughter while I was out in the cold. I was wrong. She hadn't been hiding. She had been waiting. She looked at me then, her eyes shining. I wasn't going to let him do to you what he did to Mom, she said softly. I couldn't stop him back then. I was too little, but I can stop him now. A wave of emotion hit me so hard, I almost lost my composure. The icy armor I had built around myself cracked, just for a second, to let the warmth of that realization in. I wasn't alone in this room. I had an ally, and it was the person I had underestimated the most. Thank you, B, I mouthed. Preston, however, was not moved by this display of sisterly solidarity. He was vibrating with rage. He stood up, knocking his chair back so hard it crashed onto the floor. "You ungrateful little brat!" he screamed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. He loomed over Beatrice, his face twisted into a mask of pure fury. "I gave you everything. I put a roof over your head. I bought you that phone. And you betray me? You side with her?" He pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is the enemy. She is trying to destroy this family." "No, Dad," Beatrice said, not flinching even as he towered over her. "You destroyed this family. Lucille is just the only one brave enough to survive it." Preston raised his hand. For a split second, I thought he was going to strike her. "Sit down, Preston." The command came from me. It was not a request. It was a bark, loud and authoritative, the voice I used to command a room of board members. Preston froze. He turned his head slowly to look at me. The vein in his temple was throbbing. I stood up slowly. I didn't need to shout. I had something far more powerful than volume. "The game is over," I said, my voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "Doctor, Aris is in handcuffs. Your affidavit is worthless. If you try to file that medical report now, it won't just be rejected. It will be evidence in a criminal investigation against you for conspiracy and fraud. You will be sharing a cell with your favorite doctor." Preston stared at me, his chest heaving. He realized I was right. His leverage, the threat of the asylum, had just evaporated into thin air. He had nothing left to hold over my head. But he was a narcissist. He couldn't accept defeat. He grasped for straws. "Fine," he spat. "So the medical angle is dead. So what? You still don't have the company. You are still just a guest in my house. I am still the chairman. I can still ruin you. I can still bury your reputation. I have friends in the press. I have friends in Congress. You have no friends. Preston," I said. "You have accomplices. And they are all abandoning ship." I reached into the open briefcase on the table. My hand closed around the thick stack of legal documents. They felt cool and heavy. "You talked a lot about debts earlier," I said, pulling the papers out. "About how I owed you, about how I was an asset you needed to liquidate." I slammed the stack of papers down on the table. The sound was like a thunderclap. The crystal glasses jumped. The wine in the decanter rippled. Even Preston flinched. "Well, let's talk about debts," I continued, my eyes locking onto him. "Real debts, the kind with interest rates and maturity dates, the kind you can't gaslight your way out of." Preston looked at the papers. He didn't recognize them yet. He was still too blinded by his own rage. "What is this garbage?" he sneered. "More legal threats? You going to sue me for emotional distress? Get in line." "Oh, it is not a lawsuit," I said, flipping the cover page open. "It is a receipt." I slid the document toward him. just as he had slid the transfer papers to me at the start of the meal. "I suggest you sit down, Father," I said, my voice dripping with cold satisfaction, "and you might want to pour yourself another glass of that wine, because we need to discuss your financial health. And unlike Dr. Aris's diagnosis, this prognosis is terminal." Preston looked down at the document. He saw the logo at the top, Viper Capital. He saw the title, Assignment of Debt and Security Interest, and then he saw the name of the new creditor, Nemesis Holdings. His face went slack. The rage drained out of him, replaced by a confusion that was rapidly turning into terror. "What?" he croaked. "What is this?" "I think you know what it is," I said. "But since you seem to be having trouble processing reality tonight, let me spell it out for you." I leaned over the table, placing my hands flat on the polished wood. "The medical report is paper trash," I said. "But that debt? That $35 million you owe? That is very, very real. And guess who owns it now?" I smiled, and it was the smile of a wolf who has just cornered the hunter. "So," I whispered, "let's talk about who really needs the heart medication now, shall we?" The room was spinning for Preston Tillingham. I could see it in the way his eyes darted frantically from the document to my face, and then back to the paper, as if he were trying to translate a foreign language, but the language was English, and the dialect was one he was intimately familiar with, the brutal, unforgiving lexicon of high finance. "Nemesis," he whispered, the word catching in his throat like a fishbone. "Who is Nemesis Holdings?" I didn't answer immediately. I let him stew in the question. I watched him try to assemble the pieces of a puzzle that he hadn't even realized he was part of. He looked at the signature line. He looked at the transfer stamp. He looked at the amount. Then, he looked at me. The realization didn't hit him all at once. It seeped in slowly, like freezing water filling a sinking ship. He saw the lack of fear in my eyes. He saw the heavy briefcase. He saw the way I was sitting, not as a daughter, but as a chairman. "No," he breathed, shaking his head. A nervous chuckle escaped his lips. "No, that is impossible. You don't have this kind of capital. You don't have the stomach for this. Viper Capital sold the debt." "Father," I said, my voice cutting through his denial like a scalpel. "They were quite eager to unload it. Actually, they considered you a toxic asset. They wanted cash, not a foreclosure battle. So, I gave them what they wanted." I leaned forward, clasping my hands on the table. "I am Nemesis Holdings," I declared. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like a magic trick. He went from flushed red with rage to a sickly, translucent gray in the span of a single heartbeat. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish hauled onto a dock, gasping for air that wasn't there. "You," he stammered. "You bought my debt?" "I bought your life," I corrected him. "I own the note, Preston. I own the interest. I own the penalties. And most importantly, I own the collateral." He looked down at the paper again, his hands shaking so violently that the document rattled against the mahogany table. He was reading the fine print now, the clauses he had arrogantly signed weeks ago, believing he would never be held accountable to them. "Let's do the math, shall we?" I said, adopting the tone of a bored auditor. "The principal loan was $35 million, a significant sum, even for a man of your imagined wealth. But you missed the last interest payment, didn't you? You thought Viper wouldn't notice, or perhaps you thought they would be lenient because of the Tillingham name." I shook my head. "Viper doesn't care about names. They care about covenants. By missing that payment, and by failing to maintain the required liquidity ratio in your operating accounts, which I know are currently empty, you triggered the default interest rate. You also triggered the acceleration clause." I pointed to the bottom of the page. "That means the entire amount is due, right now, not at midnight, now, the $35 million in principal, plus $2 million in accrued interest, plus a $5 million penalty for breach of contract." I paused to let the number hang in the air. $42 million, I said clearly. "That is the price of admission. Father, That is what you owe me. Preston stared at me. He looked at Eleanor, who was covering her mouth with her hand. He looked at Beatrice, who was watching with a grim satisfaction. He was looking for an exit, a loophole, a savior. There were none. I don't have $42 million in cash, he whispered. You know I don't. I know, I said. I have seen your books. I have seen the bleeding. I know you don't even have $42. I checked the diamond-encrusted watch on my wrist. It was a Patek Philippe, another gift to myself when I made my first $100 million. So, here's the situation, I said, looking back at him. I am officially calling the loan. You have exactly 5 minutes to wire $42 million to the Nemesis Holdings account, if the funds do not clear by the time the big hand hits the 12. I am exercising my rights under the security agreement. I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that was louder than a scream. I am seizing the collateral. I am taking 51% of the voting stock of the Tillingham Legacy Group. I am taking your company. You can't do that, Preston exploded. The shock had temporarily given way to panic. He jumped up from his chair, knocking his wineglass over. The red liquid spilled across the table, merging with the earlier stain, looking like a fresh crime scene. You cannot do that. I am your father. You cannot foreclose on your own flesh and blood. I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that startled even me. My father? I asked, raising an eyebrow. Is that what you are? Because 5 minutes ago, you were the man trying to force me into a straitjacket. 5 minutes ago, you were the man holding a fake medical file over my head, threatening to have me dragged out of my office by orderlies. You were ready to erase my existence to save your own skin. You were ready to lock me in a cage. I stood up, mirroring his height. Do not talk to me about family, I hissed. You forfeited that right when you tried to gaslight me into an asylum. This isn't personal. Preston, this is just business. Isn't that what you always taught me? Emotion is a liability. Well, I learned my lesson. I am not emotional. I am just a creditor collecting a debt. Preston gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. He looked wild, cornered. I will fight you. I will drag this through the courts for years. You will never see a dime. I will declare bankruptcy. I will bury you in litigation. No, you won't, I said calmly. Because if you try to fight this, if you try to delay me for even 1 second, I will release the other file I have in this briefcase. Preston froze. What file? The Bahamas file, I said. The blood that had partially returned to his face vanished again. I know about Project Azure Horizon, I said, watching the life go out of his eyes. I know there is no resort. I know there are no hotels. I know there is just a barren island and $60 million of missing investor funds. I know you funneled that money into offshore accounts to pay for your lifestyle and to service the interest on other debts. I took a step toward him. That is not just bankruptcy, Preston. That is fraud. That is securities fraud. That is wire fraud. That is embezzlement. That is 20 years in federal prison. He slumped back into his chair as if his strings had been cut. The fight went out of him instantly. He knew I had him. He knew that I held the keys to his freedom, not just his company. If I take the company, I continued, my voice relentless, I can handle the mess quietly. I can restructure the debt. I can absorb the losses into Lumina. I can make the problem disappear without the feds getting involved. But if you fight me, if you try to stop the transfer, I will hand that file to the SEC tomorrow morning, and you won't be going to a retirement home. You will be going to a cell that makes Willow Creek look like the Ritz-Carlton. Preston looked at me with sheer terror. He was seeing the full extent of my power, and it was crushing him. 5 minutes, I reminded him. Tick-tock. He looked at the document on the table, the assignment of debt, the piece of paper that sealed his fate. Suddenly, a spasm of rage overtook him. He grabbed the document with both hands. No, he screamed. No, I won't let you. With a guttural roar, He ripped the paper in half. Then he ripped it again and again. He tore the thick legal bond into shreds, scattering the confetti of his debt across the wine-stained tablecloth. He looked at me, panting, his eyes wild with a manic triumph. "There," he yelled, pointing at the pile of scraps. "There is your contract. Try to enforce that. It is gone. It is gone." The room went silent. Beatrice looked at the torn paper, then at me, worried. Eleanor gasped. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I just watched him panting like a madman. Then, I started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous laugh. It was a genuine, amused laugh. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out another crisp, clean copy of the exact same document. "Oh, Preston," I said, shaking my head with pity. "You really are slipping. Did you honestly think I would bring the original master promissory note to a dinner table with a man I know to be unstable?" I tossed the fresh copy onto the table. "That was a photocopy," I said. "The original documents? The ones with your wet ink signature and the notary seal?" Marcus, my attorney, filed them with the clerk of the Superior Court in Providence 10 minutes ago. He also filed the notice of default and the transfer of control affidavit. I checked my watch again. "In fact," I said, "the electronic filing stamp was just confirmed. The court has accepted the transfer. The registrar is updating the corporate records as we speak." Preston stared at the fresh document. He looked at the torn pieces of the copy. He looked at his hands, which were now useless. "It is over," I said softly. "I didn't need you to sign anything tonight. I didn't need your permission. I just came here to tell you that you are fired." The reality finally settled on him like a shroud. He wasn't the chairman anymore. He wasn't the patriarch. He wasn't the owner of Stonecliff. He was just an old man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost to the one person he had underestimated his entire life. He collapsed into his chair, burying his face in his hands. A low, agonizing moan escaped him, the sound of an ego dying. "I built this," he sobbed into his palms. "I built this empire." "No," I said, standing over him. "You inherited an empire, and you broke it. Now, step aside, and let me show you how to fix it." The silence of Preston's defeat didn't last long. It was shattered by the digital trill of a cell phone, not his personal phone, but the secure company line he kept in his breast pocket. Then, almost simultaneously, the landline in the hallway began to ring. Then Beatrice's phone buzzed with a news alert. The world was catching up. Preston fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking so badly he almost dropped it into the soup. He answered it, putting it on speakerphone, perhaps out of habit, or perhaps because he had lost the motor control to hold it to his ear. "Preston? It is Charles." It was Charles Kensington, the longest-serving member of the board. His voice sounded panicked. "Preston, what is going on? We just received a formal notification from the SEC filing system. It says there has been a transfer of the Class A shares. It says Nemesis Holdings has exercised a lien. Who the hell is Nemesis Holdings? Are we under attack?" Preston stared at the phone, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. He couldn't speak. The reality of what I had said, that it was already done, was screaming at him through the device. "Preston!" Charles shouted. "Answer me. The stock is halted in after-hours trading. The legal department is saying the transfer is valid. They are saying you pledged the shares. Did you pledge the company? Preston?" I reached over and tapped the end call button. The silence returned, but it was thinner now, brittle. Preston looked up at me. The despair in his eyes had vanished, replaced by a sudden, violent surge of adrenaline. The realization that he was not just beaten, but exposed, snapped the last tether of his sanity. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a cornered animal. "You bitch!" he snarled, the sound guttural and raw. "You ungrateful, treacherous bitch! I will kill you!" He lunged. It happened fast. He scrambled over the corner of the table, knocking over a candelabra. The candles hit the floor, sputtering out. But he didn't care. His face was purple with rage. his hand raised to strike me. It was the same look I had seen 1,000 times in my nightmares. The look that used to send me hiding under my bed. But I didn't flinch. I didn't even stand up. "Now," I said calmly, before Preston could take 2 steps. The double doors of the dining room burst open. 2 men in dark suits stepped in. They were not house staff. They were not Tillingham Security. They were private contractors I had hired from a firm that specialized in protecting diplomats in war zones. They were large, efficient, and completely unimpressed by Preston's yelling. Preston froze mid-stride as the lead bodyguard, a man named Kane, who was the size of a refrigerator, stepped directly into his path. Kane didn't touch him. He just occupied the space where Preston wanted to go, creating an impassable wall of muscle. "Sir," Kane said, his voice flat, "please step back." Preston looked at Kane, then at me. "Who are these people? Get them out of my house. This is private property." I stood up slowly, smoothing the front of my blazer. I picked up my wine glass and took a sip, savoring the moment. "Actually, Preston," I said, "that is a technicality we need to clarify. Stonecliff is not a private residence. It is a corporate asset held by the Tillingham Legacy Group. The company pays the mortgage. The company pays the taxes. The company pays the staff." I set the glass down. "And since, as of 11 minutes ago, I control 51% of the voting shares of the Tillingham Legacy Group, I am the one who decides who is allowed on company property." I walked around the table until I was standing right in front of him, protected by my wall of security. "Preston Tillingham," I announced, my voice ringing clear and authoritative in the high-ceilinged room, effective immediately, by the power vested in me as the majority shareholder. "I am removing you from your position as chairman of the board and chief executive officer. You are fired for cause, specifically, for gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, and corporate malfeasance." "You can't fire me!" Preston screamed, spittle flying from his mouth. "I am Tillingham. I am the company." "Not anymore," I said. "Now, you are just a trespassing former employee." Preston turned to Eleanor, desperation clawing at his throat. "Eleanor, do something. Tell her. This is our house. Throw these people out." For the first time all night, my mother moved. She stood up. She looked at the chaos, the spilled wine, the overturned chair, the hulking bodyguards, and the husband who was unraveling before her eyes. She looked at Preston, really looked at him. She saw the sweat, the rage, the weakness. She saw the man who had controlled every aspect of her life for 40 years, telling her what to wear, what to think, and who to be. Slowly, deliberately. She reached for her left hand. She twisted the gold band on her ring finger. It was tight, embedded in flesh that had worn it for 4 decades. She pulled it off. She held the ring up to the light for a second, then tossed it onto the table. It landed with a hollow clink next to the torn pieces of the debt agreement. "I am done," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I am tired of the shouting. Preston, I am tired of the fear, and I am tired of you." "What?" Preston gasped, looking at the ring as if it were a grenade. "Eleanor, don't be stupid. You are nothing without me." "No," Eleanor said, lifting her chin and looking at me with a pride I had never seen before. "I am the mother of the CEO, and I think I would like to have dessert now." Preston let out a sound that was half scream, half sob. "Traitors, all of you! You are all snakes! I made you! I fed you!" He tried to push past Kane to get to Eleanor, raising his fist again. "You ungrateful cow!" That was the mistake. Kane moved with a speed that belied his size. He caught Preston's wrist in midair, twisting it behind his back in a fluid motion that forced Preston to bend over in pain. "That is enough," Kane grunted. "Get him out of here," I ordered, my voice cold as ice. "Remove the former chairman from the premises. If he resists, call the local police and have him charged with trespassing and assault. Get your hands off me." Preston shrieked as Kane and the second guard grabbed him by the arms. "Do you know who I am? I am Preston Tillingham. I own this town." "You own nothing," I said, watching him struggle. "You don't even own the suit on your back. Technically, I paid for that too." They dragged him toward the double doors. The image was pathetic. The man who had terrorized us for decades, the Lion of Newport, was being hauled out of his own dining room like a drunk being thrown out of a bar. His feet scrabbled against the polished wood floor. He was shouting obscenities, cursing my name, cursing Elias, cursing the world. "This isn't over. Lucille," he screamed as they reached the hallway. "I will be back. I will burn it all down. The locks will be changed by morning. Preston," I called after him, "and your access badge has already been deactivated." The front door opened. A gust of wind and snow blew into the hallway. And then, with a heavy thud, the door slammed shut. Silence returned to the dining room. But this time, it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of fear. It was the ringing silence of an explosion's aftermath. The air felt lighter. The oppressive weight that had hung over Stonecliff for my entire life seemed to have been sucked out of the door along with my father. I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest, looking at the empty space where the monster used to be. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from the adrenaline crash. "Is he gone?" Beatrice asked. Her voice was small. "He is gone," I said, letting out a long breath. Beatrice stood up. She walked over to the sideboard where the wine decanter sat. She picked up the bottle of vintage Cabernet, Preston's prized collection, and walked over to me. She grabbed a clean glass and poured a generous amount. The dark red liquid swirled in the crystal. "Here," she said, handing me the glass. She raised her own eyebrows, a smirk playing on her lips. "To the new management. Congratulations, boss." I took the glass. I looked at my mother. Eleanor was still standing by her chair, staring at the empty doorway. She looked shell-shocked, but her shoulders were straighter than I had ever seen them. "Mom?" I asked gently. Eleanor turned to me. A slow, tentative smile broke across her face. It was like seeing the sun come out after a 40-year eclipse. "He is gone," she whispered, testing the words. "He is really gone." "Yeah, Mom," I said, clinking my glass against Beatrice's, "and he is not coming back." The three of us stood there in the dining room, the three women he had tried to break, to mold, to own. We were battered, we were scarred, but we were still standing, and for the first time in the history of the Tillingham family. The house didn't feel like a museum or a mausoleum, it felt like ours. The sun rose over Boston the next morning with a blinding, frigid clarity. The storm had passed, leaving the city scoured clean and buried under 6 inches of pristine white snow. It was the perfect backdrop for a purge. At 8 o'clock sharp, I walked through the revolving glass doors of the Tillingham Legacy Group headquarters in the financial district. I was not wearing the silk blouse from the night before. I was wearing a black suit, sharp and severe, armor designed for war. Flanking me were Kane and his team of security contractors. Their presence a silent reminder that the hierarchy of this building had fundamentally shifted overnight. The receptionist, a woman named Patty who had been terrified of my father for 20 years, looked up as we approached. She saw the security detail. She saw the set of my jaw. She didn't ask for identification. She simply pressed the button to unlock the express elevator to the penthouse boardroom. "Good morning, Ms. Tillingham," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Good morning, Patty," I replied. "Please call maintenance. I want the nameplate on the executive suite door removed within the hour." I stepped into the elevator. The ascent to the 45th floor took 30 seconds. In that half-minute, I mentally reviewed the list of names I had memorized on the drive over. These were not just employees. They were enablers. They were the men who had cooked the books, the sycophants who had laughed at Preston's jokes while he drove the company into the ground, the fixers who had helped him cover up the Bahamas disaster when the elevator doors slid open. The boardroom was already full. They were all there, The old guard, Charles Kensington, the board member who had called Preston in a panic the night before, Arthur Sterling, the CFO, who had signed off on the fraudulent financial statements, Julian Vance, the heavy-handed HR director who specialized in silencing harassment complaints. They sat around the massive oval table, drinking coffee that likely cost more than my first car, looking nervous and whispered among themselves. When I walked in, the room fell dead silent. I didn't take a seat. I walked to the head of the table, my father's chair, and stood behind it. I placed my briefcase on the leather surface. "Gentlemen," I said. My voice was not loud, but it carried to the back of the room. "Thank you for coming in early. Lucille," Charles Kensington began, his tone condescendingly paternal. "We heard about the misunderstanding last night. Preston is very upset. We really think we should wait for him before we discuss any—" "Preston Tillingham is not coming," I interrupted, cutting him off mid-sentence. "He has been terminated for cause, effective immediately. His security clearance has been revoked. If he steps foot in this lobby, he will be arrested for trespassing." A collective gasp went around the room. Sterling, the CFO, stood up, his face flushing red. "You cannot do that," he sputtered. "He is the chairman. You cannot just hostile take over your own family." "I already did," I said. "I hold 51% of the voting shares. The deed is filed. The debt is bought. I am the chairman now." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a stack of envelopes. They were white, crisp, and thin. "However," I continued, looking at each of them in turn, "I am not here to discuss my father. I am here to discuss you." I slid the first envelope down the table toward Sterling. "Arthur Sterling," I said, "you signed the Q3 financial report that listed the Azure Horizon Resort as a tangible asset worth $80 million. You knew it was a pile of sand. That is accounting fraud." I slid the next envelope to Julian Vance. "Julian, you facilitated the payments to the shell companies in the Caymans. You disguised them as consulting fees. That is money laundering." I looked at Charles Kensington. "And Charles, you knew about the Viper Capital loan. You knew Preston pledged the company shares without board approval. And you said nothing because he promised you a cut of the refinance. That is a breach of fiduciary duty." I dropped the rest of the envelopes on the table. "These are your termination notices," I announced. "Effective immediately. There are no severance packages. There are no golden parachutes. Your stock options are canceled. And as a courtesy, I should inform you that my legal team is currently handing over your internal emails to the district attorney's office." The color drained from the room. These men, who had spent decades thinking they were untouchable, suddenly looked very small. "You have 10 minutes to clear your desks," I said, checking my watch. "Security will escort you out. Anything you try to delete from your computers has already been backed up by my forensic IT team, who accessed the servers remotely at 3 o'clock this morning." "This is a massacre," Sterling whispered, clutching his envelope. "No, Arthur," I said cold. "This is a controlled burn. I am clearing out the dead wood so the forest can grow again." I pointed to the door. "Get out." They left. They shuffled out of the room like scolded schoolboys, stripped of their power and their dignity in under 5 minutes. Once the room was empty, I sat down in my father's chair. It was too big for me, but that was fine. I wasn't going to keep it. My first act as chairman was to call a general meeting of the remaining staff. I stood on the mezzanine level of the trading floor, looking down at 300 terrified employees who thought they were about to lose their livelihoods. "The Tillingham Legacy Group is dead," I told them into the microphone. A ripple of fear went through the crowd. "But," I continued, my voice steady, "you are not, today. We are merging this company's assets into Lumina Hospitality. We are retiring the Tillingham name. It has become synonymous with debt and deception. From this moment on, you work for Lumina." I saw shoulders relax. I saw tentative smiles. "We are going to pivot," I explained. "We are selling the private jets. We are selling the yacht. We are selling the Stonecliff estate. We are taking that capital and investing it in what actually matters: our hotels, our technology, and our people. No one here loses a job today, except the men who stole from you." A cheer went up. It started small, then grew until it filled the atrium. It was the sound of a company breathing again. Later that afternoon, I met with the only two Tillinghams left who mattered. We sat in the small private lounge attached to my new office. Eleanor looked 10 years younger. She had ditched the drab gray suits Preston always made her wear and was wearing a bright blue dress that matched her eyes. Beatrice was sitting next to her, tapping away on her iPad, looking focused. "So," I said, placing a folder in front of my mother, "I have been looking at the family trust. It is a mess, but there are some assets we can salvage." "I don't want the money, Lucille," Eleanor said quickly. "I don't want anything that reminds me of him." "I know," I said. "That is why we are not keeping it, Mom. You always talked about wanting to support art programs for underprivileged kids. You used to paint before, Eleanor nodded, her eyes misting over. "I am establishing the Eleanor Foundation," I said. "We are endowing it with the proceeds from the sale of the yacht and the collection of vintage cars Preston loved so much. It is about $12 million to start. You are the president. You decide where every penny goes." My mother covered her mouth with her hand. $12 million? Lucille, I don't know how to run a foundation." "You will learn," I said. "You managed to survive Preston Tillingham for 40 years. Managing a board of directors will be a walk in the park." I turned to Beatrice. "And you," I said. "I saw what you did with the doctor. Ara's story. You leaked that to the press with surgical precision. You controlled the narrative before it even broke." Beatrice shrugged, trying to look cool, but I saw the pride in her smile. "It wasn't hard. People love scandals." "Lumina needs a director of brand strategy," I said. "We are rebranding the entire Tillingham portfolio. It is going to be a nightmare PR job. I need someone who understands how to manipulate the media. Someone who knows how to use social leverage." I slid a contract across the table. "The salary is competitive," I said. "But you actually have to come to the office. No working from bed." Beatrice picked up the contract. She scanned the numbers. "This is more than Dad ever gave me for an allowance." "It is a salary, B," I said. "You earn it. Welcome to the working class." She signed it with a flourish. "Deal. But I get to redesign the logo. The current one looks like a potato." "Fine," I laughed. "Fix the potato." While we were rebuilding, Preston was self-destructing. He tried to fight back. Of course, a narcissist never goes quietly. He hired a cheap lawyer, the only one who would take his case on contingency, and filed a lawsuit claiming I had coerced him, that the debt transfer was illegal, that I was mentally unstable. It lasted less than 48 hours. Marcus, my attorney, simply sent over a single box of discovery documents to Preston's lawyer. It contained the foreclosure notice on the Bahamas property, the bank records showing the wire transfers to his personal accounts, and the sworn affidavits from the fired board members who were now turning on him to save their own skins. Preston's lawyer dropped the case the next morning. He knew it wasn't a lawsuit. It was a confession. The fall was swift and brutal. The country club revoked Preston's membership, citing a violation of moral clauses. His friends, the senators, the bankers, the tycoons, stopped returning his calls. When you are rich, you are eccentric. When you are broke and under investigation, you are a pariah. He was evicted from Stonecliff 3 days later. I didn't go to watch. I didn't need to see him being escorted off the property by the sheriff. I had already said goodbye to that house. 6 weeks later, I found myself standing in front of a peeling beige door in a rundown apartment complex in Southie. It was ironic. It was only a few miles from the basement where Elias and I had lived, but the energy was different. Our basement had been filled with hope. This place smelled of stale cigarettes and despair. I knocked. It took a long time for the door to open. When it did, I barely recognized the man standing there. Preston Tillingham was wearing a stained undershirt and sweatpants. He hadn't shaved in days. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. The arrogance that had defined his posture for 60 years was gone, replaced by a slump of defeat. He looked at me. He didn't invite me in. He just stared, as if I were a ghost. "What do you want?" he rasped. His voice was a shadow of the booming baritone that used to command boardrooms. "Did you come to gloat? Did you come to see the king and his castle?" He gestured vaguely at the cramped studio apartment behind him. A single mattress lay on the floor. A television was blaring a daytime talk show in the corner. "I didn't come to gloat, Father," I said. "I came to close the books." I reached into my purse and pulled out an envelope. It wasn't white and crisp like the termination notices. It was plain manila. "What is that?" he asked, eyeing it suspiciously. "A summons?" "No," I said. "It is a check." I held it out to him. He hesitated, his pride warring with his desperation. Desperation won. He snatched the envelope and ripped it open. He stared at the check. It was for $5,000. "5,000?" he scoffed, a flicker of his old sneer returning. "What is this? This wouldn't buy a bottle of the wine I used to drink. This is an insult." "It is first and last month's rent for this apartment," I said calmly, "plus enough for groceries for a month, maybe a suit, if you shop at Goodwill." "I don't want your charity," he spat, though his hand clutched the check tight. "I don't need anything from you." "Good," I said, "because this isn't charity." I took a step closer, forcing him to look me in the eye. "Charity is for people who deserve help," I said. "Charity is what I gave Mom when I set up her foundation. Charity is what I gave the employees I kept on the payroll." I pointed at the check in his hand. "That," I said, "is a handout. That is pity money. I am giving it to you because I don't want the press writing stories about how the father of the Lumina CEO is starving in a gutter. It is bad for the stock price." Preston flinched. The truth hit him harder than a slap. I wasn't doing it out of love. I was doing it out of brand management. I was treating him exactly the way he had treated me, as a liability to be managed. "You are cold," he whispered. "You are colder than I ever was." "I learned from the best," I replied. "I will get back on top," he muttered, his eyes darting around the hallway, manic and delusional. "I have ideas. I have contacts. This is just a temporary setback. You will see. I will buy you out one day." "No, you won't, Preston," I said, my voice soft but final. "Because the world has changed, and men like you are dinosaurs. You don't realize the meteor has already hit." I turned to walk away. The hallway was dim, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs that buzzed incessantly. "Lucille!" he called after me. I stopped, but I didn't turn around. "I am your father," he shouted, his voice cracking. "Doesn't that mean anything?" I stood there for a moment, thinking about the little girl who used to wait by the window for his car to come home, hoping for a smile, a hug, a well done. I thought about the woman who had sat at that dinner table, terrified of being locked away. "It means everything," I said to the empty hallway. "It means I know exactly who not to be." I started walking again. I heard the door to his apartment slam shut behind me. I walked out of the building and into the bright, cold sunlight. Elias was waiting for me in the car, parked at the curb. He saw me coming and got out, opening the door. He didn't ask how it went. He just looked at my face, saw the piece there, and nodded. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Yes," I said, sliding into the seat. "Take me home," as we drove away. I didn't look back at the building. I didn't check the rearview mirror. The Tillingham legacy was behind me. The debt was paid. The ledger was balanced. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't Lucille Tillingham, the daughter of the tycoon. I was just Lucille, and that was more than enough. The elevator doors to my penthouse opened, not with a ding, but with a soft, welcoming hush. It was a sound I had grown to love, a sound that signaled the boundary between the noisy, demanding world below and the sanctuary I had built above the clouds. I stepped out onto the wide plank oak floors, kicking off my heels immediately. The sensation of the cool wood against my tired feet was grounding. I walked through the foyer, past the modern art I had chosen myself, vibrant, chaotic, alive, so different from the stuffy dead portraits of ancestors that lined the halls of Stonecliff. The apartment was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It was filled with the smell of roasted garlic and rosemary, a scent that instantly untied the knot of tension that had been sitting at the base of my neck for days. I found Elias on the balcony. He was standing there, framed by the twilight skyline of Boston. The wind was whipping his dark hair around his face, but he didn't seem to notice. He was focused intently on a large architectural model resting on a drafting table he had dragged outside to catch the fading light. He didn't hear me approach. I stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching him. He was wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans that were dusted with plaster. He held a small scalpel in one hand and a piece of balsa wood in the other, carefully shaping a miniature tree line. This man, this incredible, patient, brilliant man, he had been blacklisted, humiliated, and dragged through the mud by my family. He had lived in a freezing basement without complaint. He had held me when I cried, and he had stepped back when I needed to fight. He was the architect of not just my hotels, but of my sanity. I walked out onto the balcony and wrapped my arms around his waist from behind, resting my cheek against his back. I could feel the warmth of his body through the cotton shirt, a stark contrast to the chill of the hallway I had just left in South Boston. Elias froze for a second, then relaxed, leaning back into me. He didn't turn around immediately. He placed his hand over mine, his fingers rough and warm. "You are back," he said softly. "I am back," I replied. "For good." He turned then, circling his arms around me. He looked down into my face, searching for any lingering shadows of the battle. He saw the fatigue, yes, but he also saw the lightness in my eyes. "Did you do it?" he asked. "I did," I said. "I gave him the check. I told him it wasn't charity. I walked away." Elias didn't ask for details. He didn't ask what Preston looked like or what the apartment smelled like. He knew. He knew the cost of what I had done, and he knew the relief of it. I didn't say, "I told you so." He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You are thinking it, though," I teased, burying my face in his chest. "No," he said, his voice turning serious. He lifted my chin so I had to look at him. "I am thinking that I am incredibly proud of you, not because you won, Lucille, but because you were brave enough to stop playing the game." Tears pricked my eyes, happy tears this time. "I couldn't have done it without you. You know that, right? You were the only thing that kept me from turning into him." "You could never be him," Elias said firmly. "He builds walls. You build bridges." He gestured to the model on the table. "Speaking of bridges, come look at this. I finally cracked the atrium design for the new project." We stood there for an hour, drinking wine and looking at the miniature world he had created. It was a hotel. Yes, but it looked like a living organism. It had cascading gardens on every level, solar glass that shimmered like dragon scales, and an open-air lobby that invited the city inside rather than shutting it out. It was beautiful. It was ambitious. It was us. Later that night, after dinner, I went to my home office and retrieved the black leather briefcase. I took out the file, the only thing I had kept from that disastrous dinner at Stonecliff. It was the copy of the fake psychiatric evaluation Beatrice had saved from the table. I walked into the living room where Elias had started a fire in the hearth. The flames were dancing, casting a warm orange glow over the room. "What is that?" Elias asked, watching me. "A ghost," I said. "One last ghost to exorcise." I sat down on the rug in front of the fireplace. I opened the file and looked at the words, "one last time." Acute paranoid disorder, Involuntary commitment. The lies that were meant to be my cage. I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt a profound sense of finality. I tore the first page out and tossed it into the fire. The paper curled, blackened, and then burst into bright yellow flame. I watched the words turn to ash. I tore the next page, and the next. Elias sat down beside me. He didn't say a word. He just picked up a few pages and threw them in with me. We sat there, shoulder to shoulder, feeding the fire with the evidence of my father's betrayal until there was nothing left but embers and a clean, empty folder. "It is gone," I whispered. "It is gone," Elias confirmed, kissing my temple. I looked around the room. I looked at the books on the shelves, the throw blanket draped over the sofa, the half-empty wine glasses on the coffee table. I realized then that I had spent 29 years trying to earn my place at Stonecliff, trying to prove I belonged in that cold stone fortress. But that had never been my home. Home wasn't a place you inherited. It wasn't a mansion with a name. Home was a feeling. It was the safety of Elias's arms. It was the freedom to breathe without fear. It was right here, in this room, watching the ashes of the past float up the chimney. "I am home," I said. Elias squeezed my hand. "Welcome home, Lucille." 6 months later, the air was filled with the scent of jasmine and salt water. We were in Miami, standing on the grand terrace of the newest addition to our portfolio. We had debated the name for weeks. The marketing team wanted to call it Lumina Grand, or the Royal Palm, but I had insisted on something else, something that signified not just a new building, but a new era. We called it the Phoenix. The hotel was a masterpiece. Elias had outdone himself. The structure rose from the coastline like a bird taking flight, its curves organic and sweeping. The facade was covered in vertical gardens that cooled the building naturally. The lobby was a cathedral of light, with a massive sculpture of a rising sun made from recycled glass in the center. It was the physical manifestation of our journey, rising from the ashes, stronger and more beautiful than before. I stood on the podium, looking out at the crowd. There were over 500 people in attendance: investors, press, celebrities, and city officials. The flashbulbs were popping like strobe lights, but I only had eyes for the 2 women sitting in the front row. My mother, Eleanor, was glowing. She was wearing a white linen suit, looking chic and modern. She was chatting animatedly with the mayor of Miami, explaining the mission of the Eleanor Foundation's new art initiative for local schools. She looked confident. She looked happy. She looked free. Next to her was Beatrice. My little sister was typing furiously on her phone, but she wasn't scrolling TikTok. She was live tweeting the event on the official company account, managing the social media storm she had orchestrated. She looked up, caught my eye, and gave me a thumbs up and a wink. She was brilliant, sharp, and finally using her talents for something real. I adjusted the microphone. The crowd went quiet. "Thank you all for coming," I began, my voice steady and strong. 6 years ago, my husband and I started with a toolbox and a dream in a basement in Dorchester. We didn't have capital. We didn't have connections. We didn't have a safety net. I looked at Elias, who was standing to the side of the stage. He nodded at me, his eyes shining with that same quiet pride I had seen on the balcony. "We were told we would fail," I continued. "We were told that we didn't understand the industry. We were told that we were nothing without the names we were born with." I paused, letting the words land. I knew the cameras were rolling. I knew this was being broadcast live on the business news networks. And I knew that somewhere, in a small, dim apartment in South Boston, a man was watching. I looked directly into the camera lens. I didn't speak with anger. I spoke with the calm assurance of someone who has won the war. "But we learned something important," I said. "We learned that a legacy isn't what you are given. It is what you build. It isn't about the stone walls you hide behind. It is about the doors you open for others." I swept my hand toward the hotel behind me. The Phoenix isn't just a hotel. It is a symbol. It is proof that you can burn down to the ground and come back stronger. It is proof that the past does not define the future unless you let it. I looked down at my mother and sister. For a long time, I believed that family was destiny, I said, my voice softening. I believed that we are bound by blood to accept toxicity, to endure pain, and to sacrifice our own well-being for the sake of keeping the peace. I shook my head. But I was wrong. Family is not a cage. Family is a choice. A hush fell over the crowd. This wasn't the standard corporate speech. This was personal. They say you cannot choose your family, I said, delivering the line I had written for this exact moment. But they are wrong. You can choose. You can choose to break the cycle. You can choose to walk away from the people who hurt you, even if they share your DNA. You can choose to cut out the malignant tumors to protect the healthy tissue, and you can choose to surround yourself with people who actually love you. I smiled at Elias. Extending my hand toward him, he walked onto the stage and took my hand, intertwining his fingers with mine. I chose my family, I said, holding his hand up. And because of that choice, we built this. The applause started slowly, then swelled into a roar. It wasn't polite applause. It was raucous, genuine cheering. I saw my mother wiping a tear from her cheek. I saw Beatrice beaming. I didn't look at the camera again. I didn't need to. I knew Preston Tillingham was sitting in his rented chair, watching the daughter he had tried to destroy stand in the spotlight, holding the hand of the man he had tried to ruin. I knew he was seeing the success he had always craved, realized by the people he had discarded, and that was the best revenge of all. I didn't hate him anymore. I barely thought of him. I was too busy living. I squeezed Elias's hand. "Ready?" I asked him over the noise of the crowd. "Ready," he said. We walked down the steps of the stage together, stepping off the platform and into the crowd, into the celebration, into the future. The cameras flashed, capturing the moment. A woman who had walked through fire, and the man who had held her hand while she burned, both of them smiling, finally, truly free. Thank you so much for listening to this story of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate redemption. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening from your office, your car, or the comfort of your own home? Please drop a comment below and let me know. If you enjoyed seeing Lucille take down her toxic father and build her own empire, please consider subscribing to the Blue Payback channel, smash that like button, and hit the hype button to help this story reach more people who might need a reminder that they are strong enough to rewrite their own ending.